Garrett.
Thank you.
Happy to have you on the podcast, man.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. So this is Garrett Garcia, president of PPK in Tampa, an advertising and production
both.
company. Yeah.
A little bit of both.
I've known each other for a few years, sort of seen you from where you are, from where you've been to where you are now. And I really want to share a bit about your story and what it takes to run an organization, a high growth organization. And obviously you have a family, you have a lot of things going on, right? It's a busy life.
Very busy.
Yeah. So first share a little bit about, what it took to get from where you were to where you are now and some of the sort of core attributes you feel like are important to, focus on when you're growing a business and growing your career, and a family.
Yeah, sure. So, advertising is really all I know from a professional perspective. I started right after college. I learned a lot in my first stop. I started at a shop that was probably 300 people across 2 offices. So I learned a lot about not only running a large company, watching the inner workings of a large company, but I learned a lot about myself and what I wanted, and so after about 3 years there, I jumped ship to, at the time, a startup. I was employee number 3 outside of the founding 3 members. I wanted my hands in more, I wanted to touch more of the process, more of the creative process, even though I wasn't, technically, quote unquote, a creative in the business when you kind of think about all the disciplines of advertising. But I wanted my hands in more. So this was like the perfect opportunity to take what I had learned, but have, wear more hats, kind of see the process through from strategy all the way to deployment, and that was really the ground floor, what I'd say, of my career. And it groomed me to do what I do today, which is run now a company of 110 plus. We really try to maintain that sort of small agency philosophy and mentality of, hustle culture, scrappy by nature, really entrepreneurial spirited. I look for that in my employees because I want people to sort of stay hungry, even though we are, larger and growing, because I think that clients appreciate that. Clients look at us and say, wow, they're willing to go the extra mile, where sometimes big companies or big agencies maybe don't.
Yeah, tell me more about that. So when you're bringing on people, I think that's one of the things I've gathered from talking to a lot of different of the guests, but also the books I've read and as I've built my own company. The people, you have to be a good manager of people and hirer of people, right? It's gonna be challenging. How do you find and bring on and maintain and retain the right people and what are the values you're looking for? I didn't mention entrepreneurial spirit and hustler, but how do you really identify that in somebody when you're bringing them into the institution? Yeah,
great question. And this market, this Tampa, Sarasota, certainly it's grown by leaps and bounds over the last, 5 years or so. But prior to that, and even now, so a little bit, still today, hard to attract that big market talent. In our business, New York, Chicago, LA, that's where you really cut your teeth and you grow that kind of agency pedigree. It's becoming a little easier to attract. But, when you talk about that people first mentality and identifying good talent, retaining good talent, I look at, I grew up in the restaurant business, from a very early age. So I love when someone comes in the door, even if they don't have advertising experience, I love hospitality experience. Little biased, I guess, in that perspective, but I think it teaches you how to multitask. It teaches you how to deal with, customers or clients.
Sure.
It teaches you how to, kind of deal with fires and fire drills, spinning lots of plates at one time. So I think, not only do those sort of hard skills really translate well into advertising, but things like curiosity, things like, being analytical and strategic, like you can grow those skill sets in work, but I think there's sort of an innate DNA in someone that makes them curious, makes them ask a lot of questions, makes them hungry for answers.
Yeah.
Those types of things really make good advertisers, regardless of the area of business or discipline that you're in.
that's cool. Restaurant business.
Yeah.
What was that? Tell me more about that.
I grew up pretty blue collar. My dad was a firefighter. My mom was, an office manager. So from a very early age, I mean, at 12, 13, I was pushing the lawnmower up and down the street,
Nice.
to make money, to buy my bike or buy a new baseball bat or, whatever I had to do. So as soon as I was old enough to, get a real job, so to speak, it was in the restaurant business. So I've waited tables, I've worked in the kitchen, I've bartended, I've delivered pizzas, I've pretty much done it all. Nice. So that is my true DNA.
Yeah. Working with people, I found that, listen, and obviously intellect goes a long way too, but being able to communicate with people is so critical, right? Because you can know a lot, but if you can't communicate that to somebody, it's not going to go very far, right? So in the current environment, when it comes to running an organization, growing an organization, especially in advertising and media, what are some of the sort of core trends you're seeing and things that are really important to focus on if someone's growing into this business or wherever you're at, but really just trying to take to the next level?
I think maybe this is any agency would say this, but obviously over the last 5 years or so, just the shift of almost everything towards digital and social. So really having this underpinning, this strong foundation of digital understanding, social understanding. Our social department didn't exist 10 years ago, and now it's one of our larger departments of almost 20. So I think by virtue of the younger generation growing up with a phone in their hand, right, they're going to inevitably be more social first, more mobile first. Those things are driving our business. So I think that's where, younger folks or folks who are looking to break into advertising should really think about spending a large majority of their time, energy, and effort is really to hone those types of skills. Yeah. But, I think, again, it goes back to being strategic, hungry, curious, that we can teach you social, we can you can go to creative school and learn some of those hard skills. But if you don't have those, and you mentioned people skills, really those will never go away. Those will never not be critically important. So especially in our business, our business is entirely built upon ideas. Right. And if you, like you said, if you cannot convey those ideas accurately, properly, concisely, then you really don't have a whole lot to bring to the table.
The social era is just completely redefined what it is like to build something. I feel like you could have kids with massive reach now, right? Yeah. I'm even looking at some of these NIL deals these high school kids are getting. You're like, wow, and a lot of this is tied to reach and engagement and sort of their broader ability to affect others, right? Influence others. The quote unquote,
the new currency,
the influencer, right? How has that changed the way you go about either creating campaigns or targeting even clients? I mean, what does that do for you guys differently now?
I think it's, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, when I started in the business, the philosophy was just push your ad to the world. Now social, digital has created such a two-way conversation between brands and consumers. It's no longer just about this push your brand. Your brand is really in the hands of your target audience, your consumers, your core, your fanatics. So I think you really have to work hard every single day and be open to allow your brand to be a little bit malleable. Before it was sort of etched in stone, like these are our core tenets. This is our philosophy. These are our pillars. And not to say those things don't exist anymore, because they're still fundamental in who a brand is and what a brand is, but you have to allow this consumer give and take. And it really is more about creating conversation than just about throwing your ad out to the world.
Yeah. I just saw on social media this morning. It was a large golf brand. Traditionally, all of their, I guess, the branding that I would expect is very like just
conservative, rigid,
And they had a skit that was with another influencer, and it was funny, but it was also a little edgy. You're like, oh, that's thrown into this brand I would not have expected, and it feels like it's shifted a lot of the way people are trying. Now, some are done poorly, some are done better than others, obviously.
And you test the waters too. That brand is that brand probably belabored that decision for weeks. Should we test something like this? Does it fit our DNA? But the best brands are willing to test things, are willing to take chances. And that's not an agency thing or a brand thing. That's a business thing, right? The best businesses, the people who you see ultimately becoming the most successful are willing to take calculated risks.
Yeah, for sure. What's been some of the helpful, I don't know, piece of advice or mentors that people have inspired you throughout your career that have sort of helped you, move forward?
I'm a big team guy. I bring a lot of sports into what we do. So I grew up playing baseball, all the way through high school, was supposed to play in college, got into a really bad accident. So like baseball drove a lot of my young, maturation and philosophy and work ethic and things like that. So, I look at maybe not necessarily individuals in sports, but sort of sports as a proxy for business. And so that's really, I think, what drives me, what informs me, what helps me, run a business and be people first, employee first. You talked about that at the head of the show. Like that's really important to run a healthy, successful business. Is you have to have sort of healthy, hungry, eager people below you that trust what you're doing and trust the vision of the business. So that really, to me, that's this team mentality, sort of a common goal, a common mission, a common vision, sort of trust the process and believe that where you're going is the right direction. Like that's really what drives me.
Yeah. I sort of hear culture when you say those things and talk about culture a lot with people that I've discussed business with, the last few years. And often find that culture can be very shallow or it could be very deep, but it's rooted in the fundamental sort of beliefs of the leadership team and the people that come in sort of buy into that. I think very similar with a sports team, right? It's like I'm coming to this team and I believe in what this team stands for more than just what we're doing, right? Who's your team?
Oh man, I mean, I'm a Georgia Bulldog, so the Bulldogs are my team, which is much easier to say nowadays. 5-10 years ago, it wasn't easy to be a Bulldog, but I'll take what's going on right now. I grew up a Cubs fan. Speaking of baseball, we didn't have a team here in the Bay Area, so my relatives up in Chicago, we used to go up and visit during the summer and go to Wrigley. So I was a Cubs fan, still am a Cubs fan.
Yeah, it's interesting identity. This area, right? Because of all the transplants. You get a lot of transplants in a lot of various sports teams. I happen to be a Bolts fan, but I was from New York and just happened to get into hockey when I moved down here. So I guess I was lucky for that. The Bolts are doing pretty well.
They are.
But baseball-wise, we're all from the Northeast, so it's all the Northeast teams.
Yeah, it's tough when you go to a Rays game and you're the minority, not the majority.
It's interesting as an identity of a city like that's trying to brand itself as a destination, but it's cool. How do we see technology? Obviously social has changed a lot, and then technology has come in with artificial intelligence, which has sort of been there, but has gotten better and more accessible now to the public. There's a lot of noise out there about that right now. How do you see that shifting, or what are some of the things that you have to be considering now? If you're a consumer, if you're a small business, if you're a large business, I mean, what are the sort of different things or common threads there that are just, critical with all this new tech? And
yeah, great question. I mean, it's a big question. It's a big landscape. It's a wide landscape. It's a diverse landscape. I think as a consumer, you have to be skeptical, because I was watching videos, waiting to come in here, and the lines are so blurred, right? You really don't know what content is real and what content is not anymore. AI has gotten so good, and it's scary to think where it'll be in just a year or two from now.
Sure.
For me, for us in advertising, I know a lot of people, a few years ago when it really just started to get real good, and you started to hear rumblings of, it's going to take people's jobs, and it's I think there's a place for it, a really, really beneficial place for it. For us, it's about perfecting the prompt. The prompt is really everything in terms of how AI benefits our business. And so it is a really useful tool in making our days more efficient. A creative who might have spent 5 or 6 hours just kind of like digging in and laying some foundational groundwork to then ultimately begin the conceptual stage or the ideation stage of something that ultimately turns into a campaign.
Sure.
AI can sort out some of that muddy, murky foundational work in a split second that what might have taken a creative or a team of creatives a few hours. So that's one instance, but I think it's a good example of how it's really helped change the way we do business and made our business more efficient. I don't ever see it taking the place of our brain power, but it's going to help our brain power, be smarter and work harder.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the human connection, right? Because you're out there putting things in front of humans, right?
Yeah.
Ideally.
Yeah, ideally.
Ideally. Hopefully not robots at some point. Interesting. Yeah, I have seen it become, it's so nice now to be able to throw something in, I don't know, a GPT or some sort of platform and have it spit out something that's like 75, maybe 80%.
Wow, you plan an entire week vacation in a few minutes.
Yeah. And then just go tweak what you want to tweak and adjust that. No, that's really interesting. I find that, and as I talk to others, it's going to weed out obviously a lot of the people who have not worked on those fundamental skills, but the true like expertise is going to shine through.
Yeah, for
how
sure.
to use those tools. And there's so many out there. And I've seen as I've built this platform, the way to schedule, the way to create, copy and stuff like that. And, it's okay. It's not going to,
it's a starting point. It's a baseline.
Yeah. It needs some work. It needs someone who's got the eye and can sort of understand what is not being sent to you, right?
Sure. I mean, you could have, Chat GPT create you a business plan, but you're not going to take that business plan to an investor.
Yeah.
You're going to spend some time manipulating and massaging it. But it's, so a lot of people just, I think you get sort of analysis paralysis, or you just have that sort of phobia of starting something, or can't articulate, or put your thoughts into words just in that initial 5 or 10 minutes. And I think that's where it is going to really just be the aha moment for people. It's the spark. It's the springboard. Yeah. It's not the end all be all.
Yeah. I hope it allows more people to do more with what they've dreamt of.
Yeah, I think it will.
Or at least pass ideas to others who can take it somewhere. Yeah, because there's so much out there.
Yeah.
What has been your primary focus as you've expanded your team? What have been some of the challenges as you've expanded your people team? Because I feel like people are first, right? But like, what have been some of the really like core challenges when it comes to doing something like that?
Sure. I mean, obviously COVID created a lot of this, and it was for us, it was this kind of perfect storm of COVID changing the way we do business. We were also growing through all of that. So our hiring need increased. When your hiring need increases past your capacity to hire, if that makes sense, you find yourself in a real sticky situation of bringing on talent, out of sheer necessity, not being strategic, methodical, or having the luxury of time to be strategic and methodical to bring on the right people. Yeah. We've talked already about looking for the right people. What do you seek in the right people? So when you are up against a wall and your business, is growing quicker than you can staff it, it's a recipe for disaster. And we weren't, we were no different. We were certainly, so we succumbed to that through the kind of the COVID years. And I think that has been the greatest challenge. I think we've worked through it. I feel like things have sort of come full circle on that topic, but for a while we certainly fell victim to bringing on, not quite the right people in certain instances. And that really, I mean, it does so many things. There's such a heavy ripple effect of bringing on the wrong people. It, talked about culture. It eats away at culture. It eats away at productivity, all those things that are really central to building up steam and momentum and scaling a business. And so I think we are past that, but that is one of the most I think, troubling things for any business is
Yeah.
bringing on the wrong talent.
What's something that business owners can look for or do differently about their hiring or talent acquisition process to just do better there? I mean, what's something you've employed there that's been helpful?
For a long time, we didn't use recruiters. There's a financial element to, a business hit that comes with working with recruiters. But at a point, I think it was a necessity to scale our business in the right ways. We talked about kind of New York, LA, Chicago, these big markets being kind of the learning grounds for ad talent. And you've got to tap into outside resources in order to pull that talent in. So that really changed the game for us. It wasn't the silver bullet, but I think that helped start the momentum in the right direction.
Have you seen it be with with COVID, where people had to be physically in a place to work for these different companies, and people have moved because of that?
Right.
Has that changed anything for you as far as talent access?
Yeah, it has. I mean, in twofold, really. One is being a little bit more flexible in your, hybrid versus in office or remote philosophy. Having more flexibility, gives people, I think, the nudge that they needed to say, okay, I will make the move, or I don't have to make the move. And yes, it's certainly helped us attract bigger market talent without a doubt.
Yeah. Yeah. I've noticed that with just, family of mine who've moved around and to where they're working now. And I'm like, life has changed now.
Sure. And I think, we talked about Sarasota, Tampa Bay, kind of this area growing tremendously over the last few years. COVID did drive a lot of that. This area was, the state, but this area was sort of put under a microscope of being a great place to live and work. So I think that was the other influence, right? It's attracting talent from bigger markets, other states that want to be here, want to raise a family here. So all those things really lifted the tides.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. I see that in my friends who, some of them have moved away early, right? They came here right after college. It was like nice to have everybody local. And then all of a sudden, one by one, they started going off to bigger places for these different jobs. And some of them advertising and marketing.
Yeah.
And I was like, man, I wish they could have stayed here and done something, right? But now they could technically move back if it made sense, right? I think it's just so much easier, so much more accessible nationally to do that. For good or for bad, I find, for me, it's one of those things where it's like, you want somebody sort of in the office, but then you want to be able to have that flexibility with them and the culture maintenance over time, right?
The culture maintenance component is huge. Yeah. Juggling, managing, cultivating, a culture when you're, on the best day, I've got 50% of my staff in the office just by virtue of how we've kind of split things up across the week, coming in teams versus, a full agency. So the game has changed. Yeah.
How do people in your industry stay ahead of the curve with all the changes in marketing and tech? I mean, what's the firm doing? What are the people doing? I mean, what's the expectation, or what's the necessity there?
Yeah, I think as an individual, you have to stay. That goes back to being curious, being passionate, being hungry, being entrepreneurial. So there has to be some element in you that forces you or drives you to constantly be better, be learning. So I hope that all of our staff kind of has that innate desire to constantly be improving themselves. But beyond that, I mean, as an organization, we make it a point to tell people, like, we want people to go find seminars, find workshops, find conferences that are going to make them better, make them stronger, either in their sort of discipline or even in some cases sort of an adjacent discipline. I love creating these kind of Swiss Army knives out of the staff who know, certainly who are masters of their craft, but who know a little bit about all these sort of ancillary domains around their skill set that make them just really sharp, really multifaceted. That in our world, that's super powerful.
I really love to hear that. I feel like if you have to develop somebody every day or at least regularly to, it's not, and not just always in the specific core discipline, but, giving them other skills to be better at just, it's like like you said, on a sports team, right? You're constantly training.
Yeah.
You don't just get to a point and then stop training,
Right.
right?
Absolutely.
I feel like that happens all the time in corporate, and people are like, all right, I went to school, I did a little training, I learned this job, and now I just coast.
Yeah.
It's like, no,
Yeah.
that's not how this works.
And things just move too fast nowadays to coast,
Yeah.
And I think it also exposes those who are trying to coast,
Yeah.
That things break too easily if there's one or two people coasting or sort of broken in the process,
Yeah. Man, yeah, I agree with that so much. What is something, if you go back, or you could tell somebody who is just breaking into, maybe leaving school, into advertising, or I mean, even into just business in
Right.
general, right? I mean, look at your career, right? So, what is one thing you would go back, maybe even just tell your younger self? Let's say you go back to yourself, before all this, maybe when you were waiting tables. Like,
Mhm.
what is something you would drop in your ear?
Great question. I mean, as an advertiser, I probably would have told my younger self to, be a little bit more keen to the ad world. Back then it was even just being a little bit more aware of what was going on television or what you were reading in a magazine. I tell college students that quite often is, be a student of advertising, even when you're, in your consumer world.
Sure.
Be curious, be more thoughtful about what you're consuming, just as an everyday individual. From a business perspective, I think I would have probably told myself to find a mentor earlier. Find somebody, latch on to somebody, be curious, be inquisitive with a business person who's already kind of successful.
Yeah.
Like I said, grew up in a blue collar family. I think that really set me up for life. My dad was a firefighter, my mom was an office manager, but I couldn't necessarily learn a lot about business from them. I think they taught me a lot about life and about being tough and resilient and all those, skills that I think are incredibly valuable.
Yeah.
But I would probably have, coaxed my younger self to find someone who knew business, to make me sharper earlier.
Yeah, the word resilient is just one of my favorite words to remind myself of every single day, right? Because life gets tough.
Life comes at you fast.
It's so tough. I do like that. And I think about this now a lot more as I've been building this platform. Every time I share a reel with somebody, I'm like, why did I just share that reel? I mean, what did that person do to make me want to share that with somebody else? And I do that all the day. And it's all reels about how people share reels all day, right?
Right.
It's like the one thing. Like, how do I do better at that and what we do? So you mentioned the mentor thing. I think that's super valuable. Is there somebody you rely on now, or who's been a mentor to you?
I mean, I think there's probably a couple. So I've become real close with essentially my account director when I started in the business. At that shop I mentioned earlier. We've stayed friends. He's a confidant. He's someone I reach out to. When we parted ways, he went on to start his own agency, and that was way back before I was running an agency. So, he's done a lot that I can kind of trace his footsteps and rely heavily on him for advice on sort of things that he has encountered, or things that he's done that I'm doing now. So I'd say he's probably the strongest influence on me these days.
Yeah, that's really nice to have that.
It's important. It's almost critical to have somebody like that.
Yeah, I thinking about myself, leaving college as an engineer, not really knowing what I was doing, but not having anybody really. My father always did business, so I certainly relied on him, but no one else externally to give me other outside perspectives on things. Super critical, and a lot of people don't have anybody, to really rely on or ask questions about.
Yeah, that's why I try to do a lot of work with the universities in the area. I have them in the office quite a bit. I'm out at USF, University of Tampa, up in Gainesville, University of Florida. So I love getting out to the universities or just speaking to those kids because, I think back to University of Georgia, I changed majors like 6 times. It wasn't until my probably last semester or two that I even had an inkling that advertising is what I was going to explore. And so I think back to just how valuable that would have been if someone like me had come in to speak to class and just get you either excited or turn you off and point you in a new direction.
Sure.
I think college kind of is a little bit of a blur sometimes and moves pretty fast. You have some, professors who are pretty big influences on you, but to have that like practical real world perspective come in and impart some of that. So I try to spend a lot of time doing that.
Yeah. I don't find that there's a lot of professors out there that are giving the knowledge you're giving, right? Or the real world stuff. I was an engineer in college, don't do engineering at all. Never even did it past my day I graduated.
Yeah.
So I think it's an interesting story that a lot of people don't end up in their initial
field,
profession.
yeah.
They don't realize it. I wish somebody had asked me more questions early on of like what my skill sets were, like my real skill sets. Not that I could do math, and that stuff, right? I think it was like, what do you enjoy? Like, what's your personality? Like, what should you be focusing on? For me, it was really working with people, which should have been where I was. Not sitting in a computer lab doing, design work for a bridge.
Totally. And it's funny because, now once you're in your profession or you're in the professional world, I should say, Myers-Briggs type analysis are everywhere.
Yeah.
Why aren't we doing those, at a younger age? And, that should almost be on your first semester in college. We should be doing Myers-Briggs analysis to understand where your skill sets, your strengths, your passions lie. And that should help shape your trajectory. I think a lot of kids, I was certainly one of them, just kind of float through trying to figure it out with no one really there to help navigate.
Yeah. The assumption that you should be doing a certain thing, and maybe it's not that. Luckily with, again, still going back to social, there are so many ways to access mentors and information, a bit more than maybe when I was younger, although I guess I could have picked up a book once in a while.
Doesn't always work.
Other than a textbook. But it is a lot more accessible, I think, to find mentors, out there, like a podcast or anything, right? Which is kind of cool. But it's cool you're going out to schools and telling kids the reality because, it's only going to help them be better and figure out where they should be. If maybe it's not, in advertising.
Right.
So obviously running a company and all the things going on is a lot, right? It can be stressful. It's resilient is the word, right? It may sound like it was easy, but it's certainly not. How do you manage stress? How do you manage that there's so many things going on to be sort of 100% on a regular basis? What does that take?
I think slowly as I've gotten a little bit older, I think one, you have to subscribe to kind of the philosophy that, it's not life or death. I think, first of all, I think so many of us and I was victim to this, you get wrapped up in what you're doing. It is stressful. The stakes are high, but it's not life or death. So I think just grounding yourself in that philosophy is number one, first and foremost, the most important thing. That helps bring sort of the stress level down a few notches. But beyond that, I think taking time and finding pleasure in, your kids. And, I do a ton with my kids. I coach Little League, coach my daughter's softball team, do volunteer work where I can. So those are some additional things that help sort of ground you and help you believe in the philosophy that it's not life or death at work. Outside of that, just physically, I do find that when I sort of fall off the rails and I'm not eating right, or I'm drinking a little bit more than I usually do, that adds to your stress. So if you can kind of maintain a good, healthy lifestyle, I am, one of those. I won't talk about it a whole lot, but I do ice bath. That brings the stress down. Sure. Running and golfing are probably my two biggest hobbies. Those things bring the stress down. So it's a cumulative effect. I think you have to find the things that work for you, ground yourself in this belief that it'll all be okay. And, you live to fight another day tomorrow at the office. But those are, I think, collectively the things for me that work best.
The ice bath, if anyone's listening, this has been a consistent theme. People I've talked about.
Are you finding that more often
yes,
now?
Yeah. The cold shower, the ice bath. There are real health properties to that too. As far as like circulation and the way the body recovers, the way your body deals with stress over time, right? Because you're putting yourself under heavy stress and then your body learns how to cope with that. But also I feel like the mental fortitude.
Yeah, a
to
little bit of
just
that for
start
sure.
doing that and then be like, all right, I started doing this. It used to be so hard. Now it's easy to
Yeah.
do things that are hard. And it allows you to do other things that are hard and not let it sort of eat away at you that it's so stressful.
Totally,
I think, right?
totally.
Which is
Gets a
kinda
little
cool.
harder in January to go
Yeah.
outside and spend 5 minutes in there, but
Yeah, and
you're totally right.
And of course, we're not in Chicago either.
Yeah.
We're in Florida,
Yeah.
so things are a little bit nicer, especially in summer when it's super hot.
Right.
But the golfing, we'll have to get out there and play. Not that
Yeah,
I'm very good,
love that.
but I'm
No,
pretty bad.
that's all right. I get out. I do a little bit more drinking than golfing, but
Yeah.
but I love to spend
Yeah.
a couple hours out on the course.
I saw we're matching with the fitness trackers.
Yes.
That's something that I thought became important for me, just to be like, am I getting enough sleep?
Yeah.
Initially, I got it because I was like, all right, let me track the fitness. That's kind of sounds cool. It's trendy, whatever.
Right.
But then as I started looking at the sleep and recovery, I was like, oh, my recovery is really bad.
Yeah.
How can I improve that so I can feel, again, like less stressed out throughout the day when there's so many other things? I need the energy. And that's been really helpful, just to have a consistent schedule as best I can.
Yeah.
And when I am working out, usually it's in the morning, I usually feel better, even if the day is tough.
Absolutely.
Especially if the day is tough. If the day is easy, it's whatever. But if the day is tough and I haven't like gotten up early and worked out, and it's like I did my regimen in the morning of eating right and all that stuff, and I'm like, again today, I'm like, I'm already behind.
Right.
Like I feel like so crappy.
Totally agree. And I agree about, not a shameless plug for the Whoop, but most fitness trackers are more about the fitness and the workout and the stress component. I do appreciate most the sleep data that this brings, and you can kind of turn the dials. What did I do yesterday that had a positive or negative effect? And sleep is absolutely critical.
Yeah, I know. I'm a big fan of this. I've been using it for a few years. I mean, all that data and the trend data, and why did I have a bad recovery? Because I drank? Was it because I stayed up late? Because I ate food too late?
Right.
Or whatever it was, right?
Absolutely.
Did I have a high stress day? All those things. Did I parent my kids all day or something, right? All that stuff. Well, cool. So, managing stress is key, but it's hard you just got to have a good, I think, workout or a good regimen of a lifestyle.
Yeah.
It's like 360, right? If you want to
Absolutely
highly
is.
perform, just like in athletics,
Yep.
it's all the same. It's just your body has certain aspects it needs.
Yeah, you've got to pay attention. You got to listen to it.
Yeah.
I think people, again, it's this grind, it's this hamster wheel.
Yeah.
Everybody wants more, wants to be better. So you find yourself in this sort of spiral sometimes.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to sort of cut that, at least just put a pause on everything, reevaluate, assess what's working, what's not working, and be okay with yourself to start new routines and kill bad ones.
Yeah. So some quick hits to end it. Don't share anything you can't share, but what's been like one of the most fun campaigns or programs or projects you worked on?
We do a lot of fun work for the Florida Lottery.
Cool.
They're a client that allows us to push the boundaries of humor. So I think a lot of the work we've done for them is our proud moments. I love the work we can do for Bridgestone, because you think about a tire brand and how fun, interesting, cool, sexy could work for a tire brand be.
Yeah.
But I'm really proud of the team and the work that we've put out for that brand.
I'm a car guy, if you can't tell.
I know.
So
I'm looking.
I can appreciate that.
I'm looking at the poster as I'm saying that. So we've got some. I can't allude too much to what we've got in the hopper right now, but we've got a couple really good opportunities cooking that.
That's cool.
Probably in the next couple months should bear some fruit.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's a lot of fun. Was there anything that you've worked on where it became more than you thought it would become?
Man, that's almost everything in this business. I mean, nothing is what you imagine it to be. Things that you think will take 5 minutes turn out to take 5 months. Things that you think might take a year, you solve in a few days. So that's what I love about this business is it's never the same day twice. What one might say is just absolute gut-wrenching stress to another is, pure joy. I think this business keeps you on your toes, keeps you young, not only in the fact that you are constantly moving, constantly thinking, constantly stretching your brain. But I think just the sheer fact that we talked a lot about social and digital and how fast this business changes keeps you fresh, keeps you thinking, in a way keeps you young. You know, I joke with people all the time. My 12-year-old daughter is shocked sometimes at the things that I am keen to or am aware of kind of socially. You know, she'll watch something or she'll overhear something on my phone. Like, how do you, Dad, how do you know about that? You know? So it really does. In a way, it kind of keeps you fresh, keeps you young. So I wouldn't trade, life in this business for anything.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
What is a business that's aspiring to become, I guess, big enough to be a client of yours? Like, what does that need to look like for them?
Oh man. Is this a question that is what brands would I be excited to work on? Or
sure. Or, what if let's say a small business owner is growing a company and a brand and wants to become big enough to be able to like, hey, I would love to work with a bigger agency and really take my company to the next level. Like, what do they need to get to? Where do they need to be? What should they be focused on to get them there?
I gotcha. Really it's about growing your customer base. Understanding your customer and growing your customer base obviously are the bedrock of a business. But when you start talking about what does an advertising agency look for in a client, it's one who knows their target. So many companies want to be all things to all people. And we see that still, even with big brands, so I think a company who knows who they are and knows who their target is, that's step number one. And when we see a company who's really on a really steep upward trajectory of growing that target base, that customer base, that's when we get really excited about a brand. Even if they're a smaller, sort of early stage startup brand, those two indicators to me are signs of a brand on the up and a company that I'd want to do work with or do work for, again, even if they're smaller.
So I know my ideal client persona or personas, I have a pretty clear understanding of who that is, not just like throwing it out there, casting a wide net, and then starting to see success and capturing those clients, and regardless of size, just like is on the growth. Yeah,
those
phase.
Two things to me are the KPIs of a really strong organization.
Very cool. Well, Garrett, I appreciate you coming in and sharing a bit about your business and your life and all the things that it takes to be successful.
Yeah,
and,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, man, we get on the course sometime.
Let's do it.
All right. Thanks, brother.
Thanks.